Nearly 3 years ago, I sat next to my next guest, Thalia Hayden, weekdays for the early morning news on NBC Palm Springs. Now, during those very early hours at the news desk, you get to know someone pretty well. But there is always room to learn more, and I have from her book, Local Celeb From Attic to Anchor. Thalia, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Well, it's good to be talking with you. I remember you were talking about doing a book, and then I thought, well, it just is all consuming in order to do that. When did you find the time to actually write the book?
Yeah, it's funny. You were with me every step of the way, whether you realized it or not. And I think you probably remember all the updates I'd come in and give you and say, "Hey, I think I got a publisher." From start to finish, you've been there the whole way, and I made the time. And I think that's the most important thing. And you make the time when you really want to do something, right? And I really, really felt passionate about this, so I found the time.
And why did you want to do it?
I think initially because of COVID, and you're in the book. Anybody who's read it knows that. If you haven't, you will get a surprise. Joe takes up a chapter, and it was the fact that it was always something that I wanted to do, but when COVID hit, there was a sense of urgency in doing it. I thought that we really needed to see vulnerability, transparency, and there was no better time than when COVID hit.
I could never do what you have done, and so I applaud you for that. I
Thanks.
mean, to me, you left nothing on the table. You put it all out there. And
Mhm.
I've asked other authors, especially when they're writing about themselves, did you put it all out there or did you hold something back? Did you hold something back?
No. And it was total liberation and freedom. And I think for those of us who may be struggling with being victims, but uncomfortable admitting it and realizing it, making an bold move by sharing your deepest, darkest secrets has this effect that I had no idea it would have. Like I said, total liberation and freedom.
Okay, but so you mentioned victim, and so I question why did you consider yourself a victim?
Well, the problem, Joe, was that I didn't for a very long time. I didn't consider myself a victim because I had such a deep love and loyalty to my family. But when I really stepped back and started digging, taking that deep dive into my life through therapy, I realized, wait, there are things that happened in my childhood. And as I grew, that definitely put me in the victim category.
So let's go back because you're from New Jersey. That's where
Mhm.
you grew up. And so, talk to me about your early life growing up in New Jersey. And let's be honest. I mean, when I first found out you were from New Jersey, I laughed
Yeah. I say,
because
please don't tell anyone.
because you just say New Jersey, and you kind of go, okay. But so growing up there, what was
Yeah.
that like for you in your family?
Well, it's interesting, and this is a big theme of the book, which appearances are very deceiving. We looked like your average middle class family, and we lived in a corner two-story home. We had a yard to play in, an unfinished basement, and I had an older brother, older sister, mother, and father. So from the outside, it just looked like your standard all-American family. My dad was a mechanic, and my mother was a realtor, and so we were very blue collar, but it looked. My parents were very young and attractive, so we kind of looked good. But there was a lot going on behind the curtain that didn't look so pretty. And my parents had a very tumultuous relationship. My and mother were very volatile. Um, that was the early part of it, and it became a divorce and such.
And so, how did you get through that? if you hear your parents arguing, or you think there's a bit of trouble, you think, oh gosh, was it my fault, or am I the reason? What was it for you when you were in those situations?
I think you go to a place of survival. And I'm very fortunate that I was the youngest. So I had my brother and sister that I felt were a bit of protection, at least a layer of protection. And the three of us would sit at the top of the stairs, all kind of huddling together and hugging. And I'd be crying, and we'd hear yelling and things shaking downstairs. And it's all you're thinking about is, we want this to stop. Please stop. And I just want to feel safe.
You write about your family in great detail, and I'll share this with you because we were at the desk one day, and I think maybe it was a holiday, and you were going back east, and I said, I said, "Are you going to see your folks?" And you said, "No, I don't think so." And I remember saying, they're not going to be around forever, and you politely smiled and said, "Oh, I know," but after reading the book, I think I do understand more, because sometimes, even if it's family, sometimes you have to cut the cord.
Yes. And that is so hard, Joe. And so many people out there can relate. And that's why I know this book hit home for a lot of people, because it's the stuff you feel, but you're scared to say. We all want to remain loyal to our family. We love our family. But the problem with that is, if there is a cycle of sickness within the family, there's no way for it to heal unless you start talking about it. And so I made that decision to not only start talking about it, but to reach out to others who are also in similar situations and try and help.
Now, have you talked to your mom about the book, and has she read it?
Yes. I don't know that she's read it. I told her when I was writing it that, Mom, I'm writing this book. There are probably going to be some things that are hard to hear. And she casually wrote back, do it, what's in your heart. If you feel you have to do this, do this. I don't think she really necessarily thought I was going to do it. And that's a part of, I like to say, youngest child syndrome, where the whole family kind of says to the youngest, yeah, 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 yeah. You kind of get shrugged off, and they don't think you're going to do something. But then when you do, it's like, wow.
Wow, I didn't
really
expect that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we are talking with Thalia Hayden, who is an anchor at NBC Palm Springs. I had the pleasure of working with her for almost 3 years, and she has written a book that is actually one of those books where you really can't put down. Once you start it, you go, okay, I've got to finish this. It's called Local Celeb: From Addict to Anchor. This, to me, is a book, in terms of its sex, music, and rock and roll in
Yes.
some ways. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is. And so talk to me about the point at which you decided, okay, I want to do drugs. I want to drink. I want to do those things that are not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, well, when you come from the dysfunction, and this is what I've learned through therapy, when you peel back the layers and you realize what's underneath, what you're trying to do, or what I was trying to do, was mask the pain, because I had all this pain going on. I didn't know where it was coming from. And when you get high or drunk, you don't feel anything. And when you're sexually active with somebody, you're fulfilling a desire that feels good. You're just looking for anything that'll make you feel good and take away the pain. So that's how I ended up with the drugs and alcohol and promiscuity, and it all kind of goes hand in hand.
So at what point did you say, you know what, this is not getting me where I thought it would get me?
Yeah.
And so when did you have that light bulb moment and say, I've got to change my life?
Well, usually in the recovery system, it's called hitting rock bottom. And I had moved out to Los Angeles to become an actress. But what I ended up becoming was a second rate model. I was a spokesmodel for companies like Miller Lite. And, it was borderline degrading work. The job was to strut around and hand out beer, and that really wasn't, with my history having gone to school for journalism. I said to myself, how did I end up here? And with the behaviors that I was, living that lifestyle that just felt really dirty. It felt I wasn't using my brain. I was losing all of my self-esteem. And so, I mean, I wouldn't say it was anything external. It was an internal feeling where I knew, I said, geez, I'm worth more than this.
But to get to that point, I mean, you worked in New York. You worked at some good TV stations in New York, and you say in your book, I would turn on the charm
Yes.
in order to get what I wanted.
Yes.
And that kind of stuck with me because it is a theme that does run through the book.
Yes.
And so when you even say that or even hear that, what do you think? Do you think, well, boy, am I a fraud here?
Yes, because I talk about feeling like there was almost a dual personality. The Thalia, the bubbly, friendly, charismatic woman that presented to the world innocent, even wholesome. And then the Thalia number two that was living this hardcore drugs, rock and roll, sex lifestyle. And I, from very early on, developed that ability to play the part of each character. I didn't want to be the second person, but that's what I was feeling like I deserved almost, if that makes any sense.
And so when you feel as though you deserve that, there doesn't seem to be kind of a way out.
Right. Well, the way out is help. And when you're stuck in the cycle, you don't really, well, maybe you realize it, but you're not ready to come to and thoroughly acknowledge that you're ready to change. And I had that rock bottom moment where I just felt so depleted. I felt so lost. I was broke. I had very few friends. I was lying. I said, this is no way to live. It's either death or straighten myself out, get my act together. And I sought out a therapist. And that's
And
how the
it,
healthy journey started.
and so is it easier to talk to a therapist and tell him or her some of your deepest, darkest secrets rather than trying to rely on a friend that you could count on? Is it easier to do it that way?
I don't know if easier is the right word. I think healthier because there's no bias. You're talking to somebody that doesn't really know you, so there's a clean slate. And they're going to be upfront and honest and kind of steer you in the direction that you need to go in if they're a good therapist, if they're doing their job correctly. Whereas a friend, might love you, be scared to hurt your feelings. They're not trained and they don't have the education to be able to guide you the way you need from a trained professional.
Did you reach out to any friends at some of your
Yes.
darkest times?
Well, yes. And that's a little bit in the book. My first love, my first boyfriend, who he had his own addiction issues and he got help. So he was the one who, when I said, I just, my life is in shambles, he said, why don't you try therapy? And then he handed me a few books of Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery books, which had never ever been introduced to. And I was 27 at this time. So I had lived a lot, but I was also very.
Well, you have lived a lot in a relatively short period of time. You you really disguise a lot of the people that you talk about in the book. And I'm wondering, why did you do that when you were so open about everything else?
Well, I'm married to a lawyer, right? Just to be safe, for legal ramifications, potentially. I didn't want to take any chances. And not only that, I didn't want to insult or embarrass somebody by calling them out by name. There are a few chapters in there where I do get into the nitty gritty and could be taken as insulting by some of the, especially family members. And I just still wanted to protect them, I guess.
Yeah, you have a sister,
Yes.
and what is her reaction to it?
She has been 100% supportive the whole way through. She and I are like yin and yang, though. She's like very secretive, very private, dark hair. I'm like this open book, literally. And so she just asked very politely and genuinely, Thalia, tell your own story. Just please keep mine confidential.
And you
So
did.
you see, I mention her, but I don't go into her
Right.
story.
If you were just joining us on Smith and Company, we are talking to Thalia Hayden, who I consider just a wonderful friend. We worked together for nearly 3 years of the early morning hours on NBC Palm Springs, and always a joy when you would come in, and you always had such a sunny outlook. And so I'm wondering, before you opened that back door to the studio, if you were like, okay, shield up.
Well, what's very interesting about that is everything you see today is real. And I genuinely found a place of peace, happiness, contentment. So from as long as you've known me, Joe, what you see is what you get. I haven't had the need to put on the dual personality. Yes, I still have my bad days. Yes, I still have my struggles, but
Who doesn't?
nothing compared to what it was. So, if anything, I live in a constant state of gratitude now. I do suffer from anxiety and mild depression, so I'm on an low dose antidepressant. That has been it works for me. And but there's no facade necessary anymore. If anything, I'm trying to be as authentic as possible.
What about your bosses at NBC Palm Springs? What was their reaction? And and your husband, were there things
Oh,
were there things in there that he
yes.
didn't know?
Oh boy. First, it was I wouldn't say a bone of contention, but I would say there was some friction around putting out the book because he willingly read it, but had to stop at some points and say, I can't stomach this. You know my husband. He said I
Yes.
have to go to the gym. He had to go to the gym because that was his, and he just said it's hard to hear some of that stuff because I couldn't be there to protect you. And I guess as a man that's a big thing, and he wishes that I didn't have to experience that. And then I always reassure him, but you're part of the reason that I'm okay today. Without him, I wouldn't be. I can tell you, we'd broken up a couple times, and it went back to being rough again.
And
So
so,
that support.
and so, what about your bosses? Was there any pushback from them?
Not really. Believe it or not, everybody was on board, supportive. I don't know. I got a few people read it, a few didn't. I got positive support from the ones that did. There's a little bit of crossover that sometimes comes into play. We try our best to kind of keep it separate. Thalia Hayden, the NBC News anchor, and then the book author. But it does overlap sometimes, and they've been pretty supportive.
So after you finish the draft of the book and you found somebody to publish it, how long did that take?
It actually happened pretty quickly because, Joe, I've been writing this book for the past 5 years. And it was really COVID, like I said, that made me say to myself, all right, instead of writing a chapter or two a year, I'm going to sit down for an hour a day and finish this thing. So I finished the book in about 6 months, and then it took me another 6 months, I'd say, to get the right publisher for me. That is a process in itself. Literary agents, book publishers, deciding if you want to self-publish. That took about a good 6 months too.
And so when you decided and you found somebody to kind of guide you, did they recommend any changes? Did they say, "Oh no, as is, that's fine"? Or, it seems as though every publisher has something to say.
Yes, true. And the ones that said, can you tweak it and make it more about journalism? I said, you know what? No. And that's kind of what led me to the publisher. Beyond Publishing is my publisher. And he was the one that said, I want it as is, whatever you want to put out there. So I took it upon myself to have somebody in our newsroom help with the copy editing and that sort of thing. So it really is 100%. I mean, my work, that feels good.
I can't even imagine, opening the box when, Amazon delivers the books and says, "Okay, here it is." What was that? What was that feeling like?
That was one of those moments when, I mean, almost like giving birth to my second child. It felt like that. It's, those memorable experiences where it just reassured me that I am capable of doing whatever I set my mind to. And it's basically the new year, and we all come up with those goals. And I remember in 2020, I said, I want to do this book by 2021. I want to have it done. And I did. And setting intentions, I think, really does get you to that place. And then you could have that moment where you're like, I did it.
Well, you certainly did, and it's a wonderful read, and it's so brutally honest. And that can't be said, I think, for a lot of things that you might read in a memoir.
Yes, I'm reading Katie Couric's book right now.
And I listened to the audio version, and
Okay.
I thought she was very open and truthful, and she wasn't really harping on other people so much as her own self.
Yeah, she was hard on herself. It shows the degree and level, though, of trauma that when you come from a healthy, normal family, you have a life like Katie Couric. When you come from dysfunction, you have a life like mine, which, is I'm a local celeb. Does that make sense to you?
Well, it does, but what it also tells me is that, you've heard me say this a million times, nobody goes unscathed.
Right.
So whether you come from a place of privilege or not, it
Yes.
doesn't matter.
Exactly.
In terms of how your life's path is going to take.
We all feel the same feelings.
Exactly.
Yes.
Katie, was very quick to, some of the reviews that she got and all of that. And if you were, on the national spotlight, that would be the same thing. You'd be getting those things. And
Thanks.
because of social media, we both have gotten our share of not
Yes.
so,
Criticism.
yes. But that's all part of it. So what do you hope to accomplish now that you have written this? It's out there, people are reading it. What do you want that takeaway to be?
Yeah, people are responding. And that's what I wanted the takeaway to be. They're reaching out, they're talking openly. The emails I've gotten, Joe, people are saying, I'm admitting this for the first time. You've given me the courage to say that this is a serious problem in my life. And it could be something that I didn't even address in the book, but it's that, like you said, the commonality. We all have these feelings. And when someone actually is brave enough to say them, then other people can identify. And it just inspires more people to address what's really going on, to live in truth
Do you ever have any flashbacks?
of just
Of your past, and think, how did I make it through?
yes, all the time. That is kind of a recurring thing for me. And one of my principles, I have these 8 principles of peace, for peace, and one of them is to monitor your success by taking a look back, whether consciously or subconsciously, having a memory or looking back intentionally at where you were 5, 10, 20 years ago, and saying to yourself, am I where I want to be now? How have I changed? How have I evolved and grown? And when I do that, I'm blown away by myself. Because that's the only thing I need as an ego boost, because back at where I was 10, 15 years ago and say, wow, now who was that person?
You have one of the most beautiful children,
Oh,
Hayden. She is such a
thanks.
sweetheart. Um, she probably hasn't read it.
Not yet. She can't read quite yet. She just turned
No.
5.
But what do you think when she is old enough to read it?
Yeah.
What she might think, might say?
I'm a little nervous about that. And that is, I think, every parent's struggle. How much of yourself do you divulge to your child? Well, I don't really have a choice because I wrote this book and she's going to know it all. There are some very important parts about motherhood, the mother daughter dynamic, which is a very, very complex relationship. That's why I often wonder how men receive my book because it is a little bit more geared toward women. And that the mother daughter struggle. And there's something called the mother wound. And I experienced it with my own mother. And hopefully, when Hayden reads this, she'll see that I'm doing my best to create a healthy mother daughter relationship. That's what I'm hoping she'll take away when she reads it.
You bring up men reading the book. I think men are just more closed
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to that. And as I was reading it, I was applauding you because to be that open and honest, and then being out there to accept the accolades or the criticism.
Yeah.
You have to be ready for that.
Yes. One, I guess, critique that I wasn't expecting was an older gentleman who just said there should be a warning because it is trauma inducing, I guess. And he said for people of a certain age, which I don't know if that's really fair to say.
Yeah.
He said it takes you back to a time where things were not addressed or weren't openly discussed, and it's uncomfortable. And I get that, back in the day, we didn't talk like this, but that's the whole point, to normalize conversation like this, to make you feel comfortable, to make it less of a stigma so people can heal.
Well, you raise a good point because I think back in the day, it was like, well, the family secret, or we don't want that out, or we don't want to talk about
Exactly.
that, or that kind of thing. So, I just applaud you for having the stuff to write something so personal, and I think your mission is laudable to help people who may not be in that same kind of situation, but knows of people who are.
Yes,
So,
that's the other thing.
and the other important thing is you read this, and then it's a case of not being judgmental about it.
Yes, that too. Yeah. There have been a few people, on my husband's side that he's like, I don't know if you want to let so and so read this, and that's okay. I'm okay with myself today, and I'm okay with my past, so it doesn't really faze me. Another one of my 8 principles is just to not worry about what other people's opinions are.
I think you're absolutely right. Thalia, it's so good to talk with you.
Same, Joe. I miss you like crazy.
Oh, I miss you too. But I still see
But
you
you're
on
doing
TV.
phenomenally, and I love Smith and Company.
Well, thanks. It's a lot of fun. And so, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how can they do it?
ThaliaHayden.com. That's simple. You just email me. You could buy my book there. I did the audio version,
Oh, good.
so you could get it all there, or of course on Amazon.
All right, wonderful. Well, continued success.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.